All right, folks, we're going to go ahead and get started. I am going to try sitting down to face you all so we can feel cozier, like we're all friends here, rather than standing up and presenting. Oops, and I just advanced my slides here. Welcome, everyone, to our first, but probably not our last, data quality training, where we're going to talk about data quality efforts that we're making in King County, as well as what you could be working on at your agency to improve your own data quality. As we get started, the bathroom, Stacy, do you want to say where the...
Sure. So the restrooms are right down the hall. You'll see the signs hanging up there. Both men's and women's are right in the same area. Folks have asked me about coffee. We are 90 minutes, so let's power through. But I'm sure that Venus at the front desk would have some ideas about what is here. We're trying to have these trainings all over the county. So that's why we were in Kirkland last month. We're in Renton this month, and so we're sort of moving all around, and so we appreciate all the opportunities that people are giving us to host. My name is Stacy Holmes. I am on the system administration team here in King County for Clarity Human Services, our HMIS system, with BitFocus, the company that is the vendor.
And I am Sarah Doherty. I lead the system administration team here in King County, and we have probably exchanged emails at various points. I feel like that's how Stacey and I know everybody far better through email than in person. So.
Right. So we have a large crowd here in the room and a short time, so we're not going through all introductions, but when you ask a question later, we're trying to have a lot of time at the end for questions. Please feel free to share what agency you're from. I think it helps people to know. Online, right now we have about 40 something people online. We were expecting close to 90. So it sort of depends on people's schedules. If you can't hear me online, let me know and we'll do our best to troubleshoot that. Otherwise, you'll be seeing the slides, hearing the presentation, and hearing questions in the room, and we'll do our best to make sure people can keep up with the conversation in the room.
And with us, we also have Amanda Tompkins in the back, who's joining us from King County, and we'll be talking about, we'll have a section on the agenda today as well.
Great.
So, all right, I think we're going to welcome these questions. So let's start with talking about what sort of the data quality efforts that we've been making in King County more broadly. The first thing that I wanted to tell folks about, in case you're not aware, is that we have a continuous data quality improvement plan. How many of you are familiar with our data quality improvement plan? All right.
Oh, that is so annoying.
Overwhelmingly non-response, so that's great. So it's publicly available, so I just want to tell you where to find it in case you want to look. It's available on our King County HMIS website, which is kingcounty.hmis.cc under forms and guides. And you can see here, it's at near the bottom. In fact, it is the bottom of the general training manuals and guides. We developed the plan in conjunction with King County and with the All Home System Performance Committee. And it essentially just includes kind of all the expectations around data quality, as well as all the deadlines that we do around local and federal reporting, with an outline of timelines of outreach that we'll make, and sort of whose responsibility is what. So what agencies are supposed to do when we have these upcoming deadlines, and then what we from BitFocus do to help improve data quality in the system. The one particularly helpful piece is the last page, which is this data quality and reporting timeline. And that sort of compiles it all into a one-year glance of all of the things that we're working on throughout the year with regard to local and federal reporting. And it kind of breaks down who's doing what as well. Oh, I see we're getting some a little bit of video footage from some folks online here. But we also break down each of the reporting requirements by section in the data quality report with more detail about what the report is, and again, what we do, what agencies do, or what agencies should be doing. So it's a really helpful resource in terms of knowing what the expectations are, and then also kind of what we're doing throughout the year around that, just so that you can know what's coming up. We do always announce when we're doing data quality efforts, especially around federal reporting. Generally, we announce it initially in our newsletter. Hopefully you're all receiving our newsletter. If you're not, you can sign up for it on our King County HMIS website. There's a big link at the top of the page to sign up for the newsletter. So we'll announce generally that we're going to be, that we have a reporting deadline coming up for a report, the one that we just submitted this week, where the HUD system performance measures. So we'll announce generally, and we'll give agencies tools for reviewing their own data, which is kind of our first step. We ask that you guys review your own data to make sure it looks the way that you would expect, and we kind of outline also what you should be looking for. And then once that's done, then we do a more targeted outreach to specific agencies who look like they have outlying data that needs to be cleaned up. So that's kind of what you can expect every time we go through this process, which happens many times a year as we have different reporting requirements. Yeah, so I think that's about it. I do encourage you to check out the Data Quality Improvement Plan. It is a helpful document. And then if you have any questions about it, of course, please let us know. I think that we're ahead of schedule already, so that's good. Well, oh, maybe not. There's more sections. I forgot. Not my agenda doesn't match up with the slides very well. So data quality efforts thus far, we have been doing a ton of outreach around data quality. You may have received many emails from members of the King County System Administration team. We've been working on duplicates. I know that duplicates are kind of an ongoing challenge. The reason that they exist in our system so pervasively is because, of course, in the previous HMIS, every agency was its own silo. So every agency had a full set of clients. Even if they were seen at other agencies, there was no kind of cross checking between agencies for clients. And so now when those are all pulled into one shared system where all the agencies are sharing clients, of course, every client may have as many as 20 duplicate records or more, depending on how many other agencies they've worked with. You would hope and dream that it would be very easy to merge those together, but unfortunately there are often slight differences that make it difficult for us to determine whether or not they actually are duplicates and which one has the right values. And so it's kind of an ongoing effort we've done a lot of work to clean up many thousands of duplicates thus far, but we know that there are more to go, and sadly we see new duplicates being created all the time. Which is sad, but I guess inevitable. And so, so that's an ongoing effort, something that we've been working on and will continue to work on. You may have had folks outreach to you back at the end of last year when we were working on the AHAR, which is a HUD reporting requirement. Then we were looking a lot at housing enrollments and making sure that housing enrollments were accurately reflected in the system. We've done a lot of outreach around rapid rehousing dates. We were seeing a lot of rapid rehousing programs weren't tracking move-in dates. They were a little bit hidden in the system, so it was easy to miss. Now they're not hidden anymore, so hopefully they're easier to enter, but we did a lot of outreach around that. We recently completed the housing inventory count and the point-in-time count and submitted those to HUD. We were doing a ton of outreach around services and enrollments, program setups, and different things like that. As we were trying to get that data cleaned up for submission. Now we're doing a lot of outreach around the community queue. We have many thousands of people on our community queue, some of whom are actually housed, and because they've been on the queue, but nobody's gone back and cleaned them up now that they have subsequent housing enrollments. So we're working on outreach to agencies to confirm whether folks are actually housed so that we can get those folks off the queue. And then we just submitted our system performance measures, or we're in the process, they're almost submitted, they'll be submitted today. And we did a lot of outreach around annual assessments. That was something that system performance measures looked at around income. So we had a number of agencies who weren't being consistent with doing annual assessments, so we were doing a lot of outreach around that.
Does that include the import from the old HMIS database, how some of the annual assessments actually were categorized as status updates and changing that to annual assessments?
So we have a question about data that was imported from the previous HMIS with regard to annual assessments that were converted to status assessments in the import. We actually cleaned all those up.
Okay.
That cleanup happened several months ago. Unfortunately, HUD is very strict about the requirements for annual assessments. So many agencies have assessments that happen annually, but they do not happen within a 30-day window of the enrollment. And so then HUD does not allow those to be counted as annual assessments, which is annoying, but sadly, those are the rules. That's the rules, yeah.
So I'm sorry, I was a little late, so I'm sorry if you covered it already. But again, the migration from the old HMIS system to this one, a number of our rapid rehousing clients who had been previously exited, popped open, and we keep submitting tickets, but we haven't received any word that this has been resolved, and we keep finding ones that were reopened. Will that be addressed? I think that has been addressed, but we're learning that it's not. I'm just a little curious.
Yeah, is this Journey Home? I thought that this had been resolved. So
no, we're still finding them.
You should just email me directly, or Karen, you can email me directly and I'll look into it. I didn't realize that it was still happening. So. All right, so those are some of the things that we've been reaching out about thus far. There's more to come. We will kind of continually be reaching out around various data quality issues. Again, duplicates, and again, housed clients on the community queue. We're thinking of the new and improved ways of identifying folks on the community queue who may actually not need to be on the queue anymore. And so we want to reach out to agencies to make sure we can get those folks off. And of course, we want to make sure that we reach out to agencies so that we don't take folks off who really should be on the queue and thus, take them away from that opportunity. So you'll definitely be hearing more around the community queue from us. We believe that for programs that were brought over from the previous HMIS, for programs that were inactive, there are a lot of enrollments that weren't exited. So inactive programs have a lot of open enrollments that are just sort of hanging out in the system, which impacts reports when we're counting like all the enrollments that might be open across the system or how many clients are being served. So we need to clean those up. That's coming up soon. So we'll be reaching out to agencies with inactive programs around that. We know that in the previous system, there was an issue with 1/1/1900 dates. So we've been going through and finding all those dates and working on cleaning them up with agencies. We just cleaned up thousands of services that had 1/1/1900 dates. Those are easy ones. Birth dates and such, we can't just clean up. Obviously, those are ones that agencies have to let us know or have to actually correct the data. So we'll be reaching out about that. And then we're going to do broad, now that we're getting in a better kind of baseline place for data quality, we've done a ton of cleanup from the previous system, and we've been working with agencies a lot. We're going to start looking at where our data completeness is below 10% and start reaching out to agencies about around what we're seeing and seeing what tools we can offer to help improve those numbers. And then the final issue that is one that plagues us a lot is issues around birth date. When the system can't determine how old somebody is, it wreaks all sorts of havoc around counting families and categorizing folks into the right buckets that they should be counted in. And so we're going to be doing a lot of outreach and sort of ongoing outreach around birth date data quality issues when we've got missing birth dates, when we've got people who are minors, but the system indicates that they're vets, and other issues like that. So those are just some of the things, limited set of the things we'll be reaching out. We're always reaching out as issues are identified to us. So, in various other data quality efforts, maybe King County or other funders will reach out to us and say, hey, this looks funny, look into this. And then it starts a whole project for us to reach out around data quality, data issues that need to be cleaned up. Yeah.
Is there any plans to check whether or not the place of habitation matches with the category of homelessness?
So the question was whether there's going to be an effort to make sure that the place of habitation matches the category of homelessness. And actually, it's unlikely that we're going to do that because as of the new data standards that will go into effect in October, the homeless category is being removed, I believe. So how do we clean that for us? Yeah, so whether you're homeless will be based on your prior residence as opposed to your, selecting the category of homelessness. So there are many data standards changes that are coming out that HUD has released to us. We expect them to change at least 1 to 3 times before they actually make them live in October. But you'll definitely be hearing a lot from us about those changes as we get closer. Did you have a question?
Yeah, with the homeless category being taken away, will the system automatically enter it, or will the system show if you select their prior residence as living in the streets, will then it show up reflect that they're homeless, or?
Yeah, that's how the system will calculate it. We'll update the calculations to make sure that they're using the information that's there. HUD's pretty clear about their guidance of how we should calculate such things.
How far back is, I'm gonna look at the data, what date?
Ever.
Ever?
The question.
Oh, sorry.
How far back is that gonna look into the data?
Right, so the question was how far back is HUD going to look into the data, and it's essentially as if these data standards were the ones that always existed. So this data will go away forever.
Okay.
That's how, unless we decide as a community that there's value in keeping things, we have that option. It can make things a little bit messy, but sometimes there is, a good case for doing something like that. So.
I have a question online. Will coming from unknown location still show as coming from housing?
So just to clarify, coming from unknown does not equate coming from housing. It just does not equate coming from homelessness. So that's an important distinction. It's coming from unknown. So homelessness, neither homelessness nor house status can be determined because it's unknown. Yes.
So I work in a time-limited transitional program, and I was just one of the things that I seem to have not noticed is they need housing by date. Something we could enter for that.
Need housing by date?
The date they're going to be exited from our housing, only time-limited program.
Mm-hmm.
Would that be something to pursue?
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, so the question is whether we would consider adding a sort of a needs housing by date to HMIS to track that date for programs that have time limited housing. We have not talked about that. Certainly it's something that we can explore as a community, whether that's something that would be a valuable piece of information to have in HMIS. All right. Okay, so now we're moving on to data quality in context, which is all you, Amanda.
Thanks, Sarah. I think I should come up, right?
Yes,
Yeah,
so
yeah.
people can hear here.
Okay, perfect. If I talk from here,
Yeah, you
is
should
that
be
good
able
for
to.
folks
Sorry.
on the line?
Yes.
Thanks. Thanks for having me, everyone. I think most of you caught a brief introduction. I'm Amanda Tompkins. I work for King County in the performance measurement and evaluation section. And I lead the homeless housing evaluations team that does evaluation performance measurement both on behalf of King County and on behalf of All Home, our continuum of care. So involved around a lot of work around performance measurement, outcomes, evaluation, specifically on the homeless housing projects. And Sarah and Stacy invited me here to give a little bit of kind of higher level context about why we really think data quality matters. You can't hear me? Okay, thanks for letting me know. I'll try to talk louder. Sarah and Stacy invited me here today to give a little bit more context around why we think data quality is so important, and particularly right now, and why we are doing a lot of push around data quality. So I'll just be talking for a few minutes around that high level context. So as some of you may know, I see some faces in the room I recognize and some that I don't, as some folks may be aware of or other folks in your agency may be aware of. Over the last few years, there's been a really increasing push towards measuring progress towards making homelessness rare, brief, and one time. And that push has been happening both at the federal level and at the local level. And there's really an increasing commitment both at the federal level and at the local level towards using HMIS to measure that progress. And in order to really measure that progress well, we need to feel good about our data, have confidence in our data, and all of that starts with data quality, obviously. And so we are increasingly invested in having a system that can deliver good data quality, working with our partners at BitFocus and all of you to make sure that our data quality is all that it can be. So locally, I think a few things have happened that it's probably good to be aware of. About a year, 18 months ago, a joint MOU was signed between the major funders in the homeless housing space, so county, City of Seattle, United Way of King County, that outlined some targets for performance that programs should be striving for, as well as some minimum standards that go along with that, beginning with all of the kind of housing program types in HMIS. And it really focused on 5 key outcomes, working with focus strategies to develop that. So came out of that report, if that timeline's familiar to you. And they are entries from homelessness, something I've already heard pop up today. Utilization or occupancy is sometimes the way we call it locally. So how full are programs essentially? How long do people stay at within programs? So we have another measure that is kind of client-centered that looks at the whole experience of the client in our system, but the one we use for what we call the system's performance dashboard and a lot of the local contracting and funding work is a program level length of stay measure. We use a measure around exits to permanent housing. So when people leave programs, where do they go? And a measure around returns to homelessness. Those are the measures we focus most on in all of our joint funding work and our contracting. Sometimes in individual funding rounds, you'll see other measures pop up as appropriate to that funding round. So I think the COC NOFA round has consistently used a measure of data quality. Some of our funding rounds use measures around coordinated entry compliance, if that's appropriate to the program. And then other funding rounds may add additional measures that are specific to kind of what's being funded in that round. So sometimes we've looked at changes in income when the program portfolio that the round is funding is appropriate for that. And in other cases, we might not look at changes in income if we were doing like a big shelter round, essentially. So those are kind of the core measures, and I think it's really helpful to understand that context. There's really only a few key data points that drive most of those measures, although all of our data is equally important. I think it is helpful to be transparent about which data points those are. So of course, we reserve the right to use any data point at any time, and we can love them all equally. Despite that, I think the ones that we'll want to really be paying close attention to that can really have big impacts on funding, both for us at the federal level, which impacts how much funding we have available to distribute locally, and at the local level when we talk about distributing local dollars, are entry and exit dates. So being really precise and timely about entry and exit dates, exit destination, so where people go when they leave a program. Residents prior, this kind of came up already around housing status. Residents prior, how do we know if someone's entering from homelessness? As HUD continues to bolster, I guess I would say, boost up that data element, I think we'll be moving more towards that one and incorporating some of the feedback we've gotten from programs and from HUD about 90-day exits from entries from institutional destinations and some details around that. So we continue to work to refine that, as does HUD. But I think we can say at this point that the residents prior data point will be an important one in our community going forward. And then for night-by-night shelters, attendance via bed nights is a really essential measure that helps determine both occupancy and utilization and length of stay within a program. So those are kind of key ones to look out for. And as I mentioned already, increasingly we're going to be using these data, both local funding decisions that are kind of short-term. So for example, King County has an occupancy measure in their contracts that's a payment point. We've had that in King County contracts for quite some time, so that's not new. And increasingly we're leaning on our HMIS data as a way to validate that for payment. So some of you may have heard from your county contract monitors around occupancy, and hopefully no one will ever have to hear from them again. Because we want to hear that programs are full and data is accurate and everything is going swimmingly. And then at a kind of larger funding level, as we make decisions about who to fund, we're going to be looking at those 5 measures I mentioned before, and then some of these other additional measures may crop up depending on the funding round. I think that's kind of all you need to know at a contextual level. You look like you have a question.
I do. I was
Yeah.
waiting to questions. I actually have a couple, but I'll start with the first one. So when we, to go back to your, some of the measures that you mentioned,
Mm-hmm.
and when we, again, rapid rehousing.
Yeah, journey home.
So when our contracts were issued, we were the referrals that were coming to us were band 2.
Mm-hmm.
Now they've increased that to band 3.
Mm-hmm.
Is there any discussion about modifying system targets based on this higher vulnerable population?
So the question, just for folks who may not have heard it, is specifically asked by Journey Home, but I think relevant to many rapid rehousing programs in our community. As changes continue to take place around who's prioritized for housing and how people get into different programs, is there any attention being paid to the system targets and how closely they match up at this time? And I think I would say that it's not something we're looking into at the moment. I think the desire was to really give families who were languishing on the wait list a place to go. But I think we could always explore it in the future.
And then the second follow-up to that is because of these referrals that come in, and we have the new rapid rehousing guidelines, which have given us a very clear avenue for when it's not a good fit for that family. They identify or they're not engaging, there's a timeline and we can exit. But again, because of the higher vulnerability that's being referred to us, I anticipate that will be a larger number, and those will reflect in exits that were unhoused, which will negatively impact our system targets. Is there any discussion about some latitude around that?
Yeah, I mean, I think rapid rehousing is a program we continue to track really closely. I think it's something that we are in the process of scaling up in our community, and we put out a lot of information about how it's doing, how folks are doing in rapid rehousing, and I think we'll have to continue to watch it. I think it's really too early to know how families will do at this point. Actually, before we moved to the VI stat and did banding, we referred all families to rapid rehousing. So in some ways, we're going closer back to a previous
Well, we
policy.
just didn't have these particular targets at that time.
That's true.
And my concern is the city RFP that's coming out and data pull that's going to happen with that.
Yeah.
If this is not being considered, that maybe this isn't a negative way.
Yeah, I will let the city speak to their RFP processes and how, what they may or may not be taking into consideration for that. I know at the systems level, we haven't had that conversation yet, but of course, it's something we'll continue to track if our rapid rehousing performance isn't where it needs to be.
Any other questions for Amanda? Great, okay. Thank you.
So me. Okay. So I'll stand up here so I'm not hidden over here in the corner behind the computer. So sort of opening this up, talking about data quality as it affects what we're doing at a higher system level basis is how we wanted to start this, what we're doing to reach out to all the agencies, what we're doing, what we need to do to report to HUD. So before we get to what agencies can do and what you can do as HMIS users to run reports, we wanted to talk about, well, what are we talking about with data quality? How would people define data quality? And so we came across, we have some good information from a recent conference. Go ahead. So when we're talking about data quality, we tend to think about it, sort of data nerds, we tend to think about it in 4 components. And I'm going to sort of go over those briefly now so that then we can think about those components when we're looking at reports and standards that we're trying to meet. And so I'll summarize some of those 4 components. We're going to talk about completeness, timeliness, accuracy, and consistency. So we're sort of pull apart data quality and looking at it in all those elements. Data completeness, and so the definitions that we've pulled here, we've adapted from some colleagues who presented this at the NHSDC conference, so the National Human Services Data Consortium conference that just happened a couple of weeks ago, which all the human service data people get together and look at new and better ways of analyzing data and talking about it, and data quality is a big part of that conversation. So they have these good definitions of data completeness, defined as the degree to which HMIS records do not include partial or missing data. So obviously, partial or missing data, we sort of, I think, all think about data quality in terms of completeness. Is all the data there? Or have all the fields been filled out of all the elements that we're trying to collect data on? Completeness also captures the issue of the lack of data from projects that are not participating. So we don't have complete data in our community by just looking at the HMIS system, because not every single agency participates who serves the population that we're interested in looking at. And so getting as many agencies to participate from a data perspective is really critical. We can get a bigger picture of that and get more completeness.
Does that also mean agencies that do participate in HMIS, but not all their projects, maybe get more of their projects, more of their housing projects participating in HMIS, even if the requirement is not necessary?
Thank you. So the question is, would that also apply to agencies who maybe some of their projects are participating in HMIS, but not all of their projects? And even if they're not required to. And we definitely have agencies that are participating in HMIS that aren't necessarily required to, but they definitely want to see the full picture of all their projects in there. And it does then give us complete data. So in King County, and the HUD expectation is that we have this goal of 95% complete data for all the universal data elements. So we're working towards that goal of a 5% error rate. I mean, really a 0% error rate, but 5% is, there are times that I think even HUD agrees that there will be some missing or erroneous data, and 5% is the threshold. These are what the universal data elements are listed up here: name, date of birth. You're familiar with all of these. They're all on the client profile. Some of these are also then as part of the program enrollment, destination, the entry dates, exit dates. The reports that we're going to talk about a little bit later really focused on these kind of elements. The name, date of birth, social security number are probably the areas that we will see the highest error rates because of non-consent in our community, and we're working really hard to talk about the benefits of consent and how the data gets used and be transparent about that for clients so that they're comfortable, so that we can continually work towards having complete data in the system. Timeliness. So the way that timeliness is defined by our colleagues who sort of work in this area, the period between which the client data is collected and when the information is entered into HMIS. If they're there with you and you're entering it together, perfect, right? You're getting that data, you're getting it right into the system. When it's fresh from the intake and it's, you sort of know the details, that's ideal. The longer period of time that stretches between when that data gets collected from the client and gets entered into the system, you can imagine people's memories get foggy. Also, reports get run before that data gets put in there. So timeliness is a big part of data quality as well. Go ahead. So we have already some best practices in place in our community in the form of our standard operating procedures. So all of the agencies that participate in HMIS operate under our standard operating procedures, and those standards are outlined in there. That we have a 2-day standard that the program-specific data is entered within 2 days of collecting it, that the program-specific data elements are entered at or before 30 calendar days after the person leaves, the last service date.
And can I just, this is my slide, my mistake, but so for night-by-night shelters, it is 30 days. For day centers, it's actually 90 days.
Thank
So,
you. Thank you.
Apologies.
I tend to be very shelter focused, so I didn't think about that. And so that at exit also, the specific elements are also within the 2 days. So obviously we have a good best practices standard that we don't want a lot of time in between when that data gets collected and when it gets entered. And that's why that standard is written into the standard operating procedures, sort of to meet this idea of timeliness in terms of data quality. Accuracy. So I want to talk about accuracy and consistency almost together, because sometimes it's hard to tell them apart. But if we think about the pure definition, we're looking at that accuracy is evident when the data in HMIS reflects the actual characteristics and experiences. So is it true data, right? Is it correct and accurate data of what is being collected from the client? It seems kind of obvious, right? But when you sort of think about what the definition is. And then sort of the flip side of that is that when the data is not accurate, it obviously has an impact on what the system is showing us in terms of the experiences and services, experiences of the clients and services from the agencies. In terms of consistency, is it collected and stored in a uniform manner? You can imagine that if one agency does something one way and the agency next door does something completely different, how that trickles into the system. That's why we have standard operating procedures in the first place, to try to get all the agencies to be consistent in how we handle the important privacy and security of our clients and how we handle the importance of the data. That's why we have these trainings. That's why there are agreements, so that we all have the sort of shared understanding of why, how, when, how, and why it should be collected. And so I also think of accuracy and consistency around, particularly comes up around any field where the user can type the data directly. So obviously it comes up with even the drop downs. If you're consistently selecting the incorrect item from the drop down list, then that would be a problem. But that's why we have drop downs in databases, is to try to increase consistency among all the data so that not everybody's just writing their own answers. But obviously that the problem comes in when we have a field that you can type into. Names and date of birth, right? You see errors in those fields all the time because we as humans make mistakes and we type into those fields. And so that's why we the more consistent process you have and the more trained all your staff are on entering data, sort of being aware that, oh, this is where mistakes get made. This is why we drive home all the time, search for a client before you create a new profile, because that name field is a mess. Stacy, the name Stacy, I don't use an E in my name. People give me, with my signature, will send back an email with an E in my name. That's normal, like we're humans. So you can find, I bet you could find me in the system with my name spelled E-Y-I-E, S-T-A-C-Y, right? And people just make mistakes. And so the more that we're trying to be deliberative with ourselves of like, okay, let's make sure I have 3 Stacys in my life, but this client spells their name this way, making sure that happens, because those typos, if you pull up a list of clients, you'll see, oh, Stacy's in there 3 times. I can tell this is the same Stacy, but her name was spelled differently. So when somebody searched just by the way I'm thinking of it, it didn't come up. So sort of that's where accuracy and consistency really comes to life, is thinking about where human error can come into play with typing in data. Oh, if you go back just really quickly. The other thing to think about it is with aggregate reporting, right? Like consistency, we cannot put client records together and get a number and say, everybody who is this age, we want a count of them if there's a bunch of mistakes in the date of birth field, right? The date of birth field, we won't know how old that person is, like Sarah was saying. So aggregating data, which is what we do for reporting, it just hinges on consistency and accuracy. Because all those people that when I was entering their birthday and I said that they were born in 1800 are not going to get pulled into that count of people who are 24 years old, right? Just because I made a mistake, and mistakes happen. So the more we try to build systems into place to minimize those mistakes with best practices, with reviewing reports on a regular basis, then the aggregate data for your agency and then across the continuum is that much better. So now that's why we're talking about best practices. Yes?
So like in the search field, when you're searching somebody's name, you can type in their entire name, spell exactly how it is, and it doesn't show up. What's the deal with that? I understand that. Why do I have to put in half their name, and half the first name, half the last name? And that's something that's not consistent too, because sometimes that doesn't work. I can be searching for one person for 20 minutes, cannot find them, and then maybe pull up a report, and then they're on that list.
Interesting.
It's just really weird to me.
Oh, yeah.
How it works like that. I don't know if that happens to anybody else, but it happens to me.
Is that, have you heard? I haven't had that. So the question is why in the search field you can type the exact person's name, full name, and have that person not show up. And other people might have experienced this before. Sometimes the search can, sort of freeze up, or it's working too hard. I mean, I think that, have you had that, have you been able to pull up that person when you just do the first three of the first name and the first three?
It's very sporadic sometimes, but sometimes I can, sometimes I can't. Sometimes if I will search, say I'm searching my name, Teresa Kelly, and then I'll put in, spell it exactly how I have it, or then just put TERKEL, and it still didn't show up, but then I can run a report because I know they're in our shelter.
Right.
And then I'll see them on the list, then I'll have to get their unique ID number and then pop that in the search.
And then you find them by their unique ID.
Yeah.
And you haven't been able to see that there's any sort of data quality issue with the name or anything.
Yeah.
Huh, interesting.
So I think that what can sometimes happen is that people put spaces after names without needing to, and so then you can't see the space, but it's still there. So the system wouldn't identify that as an exact match. But I would say that if you are having this problem, to contact the help desk and let them know, and they can look into it. If it is a broader system issue, we would want to know about that so we could look into it and get it fixed.
And then there was another question.
Yeah, speaking of reports, is there going to be still the option in the future to design our own reports, have custom reports we can create instead of the canned reports that are already there?
So I think what you're talking about is sort of some more functionality to pull the data out. So the question is there the option to design custom reports coming in the future versus the canned reports? Yes, that's still coming. The functionality is not ready to be released yet across every agency. And so the short answer is yes, it's coming. It's not here yet. But that then would allow you to pull in, it would still be some limits of what you could do with it, but that you could pull in some of the fields that you want to see that maybe aren't on the canned report.
Yeah, or just focus on specific fields, maybe correct data quality on that particular.
Right,
Yeah.
yes, exactly. Was there another question?
Okay, I have seen where two names, same person, but they duplicated in here. How do you determine which one to use?
So if you have a duplicate profile, So the way that I've heard some people determine before they ask for it to be merged is to look in the history to see what's been the most recently used profile, right? Because you can look in the history tab and sometimes it's obvious that, oh, this one was, you know, created and was migrated over from the system years ago. But this one obviously is the one that, you know, other agencies have been using or our agency has been using. So the history tab is a good place to go and see that information.
But then you should also contact the help desk to have those profiles merged so that then both the information from both of them will be merged into one profile. And so then you won't have to choose.
Right.
Yeah, and the help desk is fine with receiving a list too.
Yeah.
Plenty of people build up lists for them, yeah.
So we have a couple questions that have come through here. One is destination going to be a requirement for emergency response shelters?
It already is a requirement.
Yep, it already is a requirement. There's another question. How do programs that serve a protected class factor into this? So I think around de-identified profiles, you know, except for the I'm assuming that this question is relating to de-identified profiles and consent refused also affect the quality of the data. Yes, I mean, obviously the personally identified information, name, social security number, month, and, you know, date of birth, you know, that is a year or two above or a year or two below the actual date of birth. All of those in our community have higher error rates because of the consent refused and because of groups of clients who cannot have their data in the system, it's a very limited number compared to the client population that we serve. So those are the areas that we'll see the errors for consent refused. All the other data should be accurate and true. I mean, there's all the other program enrollment data, exit data, destination, all of that data can be absolutely complete and accurate for a consent refused client. It's not personally identifying, and so it can be in there and it becomes part of the aggregate reports. Let me see. So there's a question about data integration. I think that we can wait and we'll follow up on the data integration question separately. I want to make sure we have time for the best practices and reports, and then time for Q&A at the end. Okay, great. Go ahead. I'll hand it over to you since I've been yelling at the crowd.
So we wanted to talk a little bit about best practices around data quality, which we have gone over some of. We've gone over the standards that have been set in our community and nationally, but we wanted to talk about some additional items. So the first thing is, you know, obviously to regularly review your data. That's going to be the biggest key towards data quality. Is actually reviewing the data so that you can see what needs to be corrected. We recommend that you create a data quality plan. Do any of you have data quality plans, just out of curiosity?
Raise your hand if you do.
Yeah. All right, nobody has a data quality plan. That's okay.
You do under us.
Yeah. And to create a data quality plan, you know, you just want to kind of identify where your agency needs to improve based on what you're seeing or based on what's being identified to you by funders or others. And then find a report that shows you that information. And if you're not sure what report to use, I'll show you, we'll talk about a couple of resources. And then, you know, determine what your baseline is, and then set a schedule that you run that report, you know, monthly or weekly or whatever makes sense to see whether your numbers are improving based on, you know, whatever efforts you're putting in place to actually make those changes happen. Yeah?
So I do run a report to kind of figure out where my errors are and stuff.
Great.
But is there an additional report I can do to send it to whatever employee needs to correct it?
So there was a question about whether there are additional reports that can be run to send to employees to correct data, and we're going to actually go over several reports that are that may be useful.
Okay. I was told differently by the help desk that wouldn't be an option.
That what wouldn't be an option?
That doing that through like a data analysis tab, because I work with Commerce and they showed me how to do it, and I don't have the tab available.
Oh.
They're saying that I'm not going to be able to have the tab, so I won't be able to run this report without directly contacting you guys to run this report?
So you're asking about ad hoc reporting, which is not currently available in King County. We are planning to roll it out, but it just requires a lot of support for the community. And so we need to put in a strategic plan in place to make sure that we're providing that support, because otherwise folks will have more difficulties with it than.
But the timeline of giving it, or being given, when I was emailing the help desk, they're saying early fall, but that puts me up against my October 1 deadline to have my data accurate for HUD. And so.
If there's reports you need between now and then, though, you can contact,
So
I mean,
on
like,
a monthly basis, I can do this and have you guys pull this report so I'm not.
Well, we should talk about it separately.
yeah, we can
to work
find
out
a
the
solution
details.
for you. But the data analysis tab is exactly the custom report options that we were just talking about.
Yeah, fast track that.
So if you are not sure what reports to run, we're going to talk about several reports that are useful at the end of this training. But I did want to mention that we have a report sort of help portal at get.clarityhs.help, which is our help center. Right on that page, you'll see a section for reports that lists many of our commonly available reports in the Clarity Human Services report library and a lot of details about how to run those reports. And if you're still not sure, don't hesitate to contact the help desk. They're very familiar with our reports and can tell you what exists that'll help you get the information that you need to get at. Another best practice, be aware of reporting deadlines. As I mentioned, our continuous data quality improvement plan, which again, publicly available on our HMIS website, outlines all of the deadlines that we're working towards when doing local and federal reporting. And so, just keep those in mind. Pay attention to the newsletter when you receive it to see what's coming up in terms of, data outreach that we're going to, or data quality outreach that we're going to be doing, just so that you know that, yep, going to have to set aside some time because I know that our enrollments are, going a little bit wild and we need to rein them in. So, and then matching paper forms to HMIS data entry. We have paper forms available on, again, the HMIS website, kingcounty.hmis.cc, that do mimic what you see in the database. We actually just updated them maybe a month or so ago to make sure that they're accurate, and we'll keep them updated as data standards change. So that's always a great resource if you don't already have your own forms. If you do have your own forms at your agency, obviously having them mimic as close as possible the actual data entry and the options available will ensure that your data quality is better. Yeah.
How do we get the newsletter? I know it only goes to my director, but she has to forward it to me all the time.
Sure. There's actually if you go to the King County website, kingcounty.hmis.cc, there's a big button at the top of the screen. I think it's at the top of the screen, or it's somewhere on the screen that says like sign up for email alerts or something like that. And that's how you can sign up for the newsletter. Or if you can't find it, just contact the help desk or email Stacy or
our cards are
and
in the back.
we'll get you set up. Yeah, we have a lot of people subscribe to the newsletter. We put a lot of work into our newsletter. So we love when people read it. It makes us very happy. So if you read it, send us an email and say, your newsletter is great, and you'll make our day. And then also consider whether you can go paperless. Is it an option for you to be using HMIS in the field or as you're working with clients? If so, that's going to be the easiest way to increase the quality of your data with regard to the kind of lost in translation stuff that can happen between a paper form and the system. Other best practices, understanding the HUD data elements. This is a little bit of a slog, but it is super helpful in terms of really getting to what HUD's intentions are with regard to the data that they are requiring of us. This is a link. We'll send out this slide deck to everybody, so you'll have the link to the HUD data manual, the HUD Data Standards Manual, which again, great bedtime reading if you want to fall right asleep. But it's also easy to search through it for the specific field that you have a question about. Like, what is the intention of this field? What are the options that should be here? And, going straight to the source. It's often what we are doing when we're getting questions about stuff too. So it's a great resource. Yeah, as long as you don't try to read through it. Just search to find what you need. Then it's a much better resource. And then understanding HUD reports. For complicated reports, we actually create guides to those reports. We're going to talk about, so we have a guide to our to the outcomes report that I'm sure you all are familiar with. That's available on the website. We're going to talk about an HMIS data quality report. That's a new report that HUD is requiring all HMIS vendors to make. It came out maybe a month ago
April
or so.
1st.
April 1st, right. And it's a very involved report. We created a very involved guide to go along with the report that's super helpful because the report identifies a lot of things like, you know, here's your data that has issues. Well, what does issues mean? That's a little bit vague. So this guide goes into all the detail of exactly what will show up on this report and why. And we'll talk about this report in more detail. But we created a guide for it that's also available on our King County HMIS website. And then, boy, if you really want to have a good time, just Google the name of the report and programming specs, and you can find the actual programming specs that HUD provides to HMIS vendors that they use to develop these reports. They're very specific, extremely detailed, but they are a great way to help you understand exactly what the reports are looking at in terms of any particular item on a report. You know, so like the APR or the, what's another report that people look at? Well, like this HMIS data quality one, if we hadn't created the guide, you guys could have just read the programming specs. But be glad we created the guide. And this, you know, this graphic right here, which you can't really see very well, but this is an example of something that's part of the programming specs where they, you know, have sort of mapped out, these are, the boxes represent enrollments. And so they kind of map out like what kinds of enrollments would be counted in this measure versus not counted in all these different scenarios. So a ton of detail. It's what our programmers use at BidFocus for developing reports for Clarity Human Services. And so again, if you have questions and you really want to find an answer, that is an authority where you can go to find that information. And so then the last section that we're going to talk about today is reports, which are also a best practice, using the reports, and probably this is going to be a piece that you guys all came for, which is which reports to use for what. So we're going to talk about 4 different reports. The first one that we're going to talk about is the monthly staff report. This is a report that is emailed out to agency leads on the 15th of every month. We had some issues where it was getting mailed out to about half of the agency leads and then it was stopping. That has been fixed. So now if you're an agency lead, you should be receiving it every month. If you're not an agency lead, you can ask your agency lead to see it if you would like to. It is, so now we're gonna be jumping around a little bit and let's see if I can do this. So I want to show you these reports as well. So here's an example of the monthly staff report. It gives you some overall information about your agency's timeliness, how many of your folks are refusing, you know, how many fields you have that have don't know, how many fields are not collected, and then how many clients you're serving. It also breaks it down by your actual staff in terms of how many clients they're entering, you know, what their timeliness is, and other information like that. And then it breaks down each particular field that you're entering, and you know how many have don't know, how many are refused, and the percentages, how many are not collected. So this can give you a great monthly perspective on how complete your data is, and by staff person, which can be helpful for knowing you know, who needs more support in terms of data quality. Yes, it's actually available in the report library as well. It's under the email report section. And so this report can help you answer questions like how quickly is our data being entered, how complete is our data, and then do any of our staff need additional support or training around data completeness. The next report is one that it's probably the one that we recommend the most often when we're asking you to do data review before a reporting deadline. This is the program details report. It's a report that you can run for all of your programs, one of your programs. You can run it for data at entry, at status update, at annual updates, and at exits. And I'll show you what that looks like here. So this it is only available as a spreadsheet. You see there's a cover sheet, and then at the bottom, you'll see that there is a tab for each different section of data, depending on the options that you run the report for. So ENT means at entry, all the data at entry. STS is status, all the data at status updates. ANN is annual, all the data at annual updates. And then EXT is exit, all the data at exit. And what it will show you, and these are all de-identified clients, it'll show you essentially all of the data for all of those clients, all of your clients who are enrolled. You can see it's quite a lengthy list. And so you could easily see what data is missing. You can glance very quickly, you can see what data is inconsistent. If you know that at your agency, a field should always have certain values in it, you can quickly scan to look for outliers, ones that don't match. And in general, it's just an easy way to see it all at once, rather than having to go into individual client records and look for what's wrong. You've got it all here to scan through. And so this is one that can help you identify which of your clients have missing data. Again, which data contains typos or unexpected outlying values that you can scan through. And then this is also a helpful one to look at which of your night-by-night shelter clients, if you have a night-by-night shelter, are missing services. There's one column that breaks down, that identifies whether clients have housing services and what the dates are for those services. So it's very helpful when you're looking at all the clients who are enrolled in your shelter to make sure that they also all have housing services in the way that you would expect. The third report that I want to talk about is the Seattle-King County Program Outcomes Report, which is one that you are all, I'm sure, familiar with. This is one that that's a custom report that was developed just for this community with the input of the City of Seattle and King County. We have created a guide, a very helpful guide that's great about answering questions about all the specific fields on the report, which is again available on our King County HMIS website. Let me show you that one. So here, this is just a screenshot of it. You can see that it shows you how your programs align with these key measures that Amanda identified that are being looked at in the community in particular, and that are tied to contract requirements. And so you can see where your program, how your program is faring. This report is undergoing some changes. It's in testing right now. There's going to be some more program-specific items for housing, for permanent housing programs and for rapid rehousing programs. Also, the equity outcomes are going to be broken down by race instead of just by white households and households of color. And right now, the report, when looking at households that are homeless, it does not. It looks at where your residence prior says, and if you're in an institution, it does not count you as homeless. And so we're changing that to match the HUD definition, where as long as your institutional stay was less than 90 days, you will, and you were homeless prior, you will be counted as homeless. So those are some changes that are upcoming with that report. Yes.
Is there going to be a version that could be applied to non-housing programs? Because most of these outcomes focus mainly on housing outcomes, but I know that it's being put into contracts for day shelter programs or hygiene centers, which are not housing placement programs.
So the question is whether a version of this report will be available or be developed that's more applicable to non-housing programs. We developed this at the request of the City of Seattle and King County. So I would talk with your contract monitors at the City of Seattle and King County and ask if they have plans for making such a request. Yeah.
Sarah, are they going to combine the length of stay field or do something different with that so that we don't have to remember what HUD's definition of a leaver versus a stayer is? Like for the length of stay, the last two columns.
Oh, yeah, yes.
So that there's,
Oh, sorry. So there's a question about whether we're going to combine the length of stay fields so that folks don't have to remember what a leaver is versus what a stayer is. And I am trying to remember. I can't say for sure, but I'm pretty sure that we are just having one length of stay, not two separate ones anymore, if I'm remembering right from going over these changes with our developers. So yeah, I'm pretty sure that's the case.
Well, and I don't know if you already mentioned this, Sarah, but since we've been talking a lot about occupancy and standards around occupancy and what has always been a contract requirement, if you are a shelter or housing program, this is probably the best report to be able to pull easily and see how the system would calculate your occupancy or your utilization. Up there in the right-hand corner, that's the percentage that would get checked and sort of would match the calculations being done at the county level or by the city. So, so I direct agencies to this report to look at their occupancy.
Yeah.
Okay, this may be a very simple to do thing and I just don't know how to do it, but we have like 5 or 6 different news refrigerating homes in our, and if I want to run just, and they're kind of separated by, so I can't just, I know how to highlight the 4 that are in a row, but then there's a couple down here between, is how can I run an aggregate all of our programs at once? How do I go down and highlight those other ones?
So the question is how to multi-select programs when wanting to run from the outcomes report for multiple programs at once, and you should just be able to use control, hold down control.
And it's always something most people know how to do. And
Actually,
tell me how to do.
Yeah, actually it drops off when you get to the bottom one. I know what Shannon's talking about because you can highlight the first ones and then for whatever reason, it just like drops. So it highlights the whole chunk and you don't want some of those projects. Like we have multiple programs in our agency. So it'll pick the first 3 and then there's actually 2 like our pilot refugee housing that's sitting down there and you can't jump. So.
I was going to say, so usually I run into that problem if like you can select everything by doing the shift in your mouse, or you can just deselect by using control, or one trick is to select all using the shift and go back and deselect using the control. So that might be, depending on your mouse computer configuration, that might be a workaround. Joy Hunt is on with our virtual audience and says that length of stay is being combined on the outcomes.
Thank you, Joy.
Thank you, Joy. There's another question here. Will there be an option to keep the present outcomes report as is? We have found the ability to see leavers and stayers separately as useful.
We have not discussed that option. As far as I know, we're replacing this. We can, discuss that with the city and see if there's an interest in doing that.
Okay, great.
All right, and so again, the outcomes report helps you to understand whether you're meeting contract requirements, helps you to see your HMIS consent rate, and then again, changes coming to this report soon, so hopefully it will be even more helpful towards to looking at your program outcomes. And then the last report that I want to talk about is this new report from HUD, the HMIS data quality report. And HUD is describing this as part of an HMIS data quality framework that they are, I guess, slowly putting out there. A lot of these things are things that communities have developed for themselves, including us. Our reports cover a lot of the same things that this report covers. But HUD finally decided that they also should, get in the game of helping communities improve their data quality and identify what data quality issues are. So now we have kind of the official word from HUD, the official report that they want communities to have available. So again, this is a new report as of April 1st. We created a guide that's available on our King County HMIS website. It's 15 pages long, but it is beautiful and super helpful. And it's a lot of charts, so you can really easily get to the part that you need if you have questions about specific items that are on the report. So let me show you what that report looks like. So this is the HMIS data quality report. It starts out by showing you counts of different groups of folks, and our guide breaks down what lands somebody in one of these pools. And then it kind of goes through a lot of different sections of information and identifies counts of clients who, for whom they have answers that are don't know or refused, counts of clients who have missing data, and in our guide we've defined what missing means, and then data issues, again, that mysterious category of what data issues are. So data issues can be a wide variety of things, which is why we broke it down in the guide that we created to address, to kind of, for name, what is a data issue? For social security number, what is a data issue? Because they have some really specific things that they identify. For social security number, for example, social security numbers that are all the same number, social security numbers that don't meet the Social Security Administration's requirements for social security numbers, social security numbers that are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 0.
Yeah,
I lost
it
count.
ends up in that data issue category.
Yeah, so those are the kinds of things that show up under data issues. For each element, it's a different category of things. So that's, again, where our guide comes in. And then it also gives you percentages of error rates. And so if you, go through the whole report, it's quite long, but it breaks down all the different elements, the universal data elements, and kind of how your agency is faring with those. It looks at chronic homelessness in cases where chronic homelessness can't be determined, and identifying clients for those issues, and then data timeliness, and it ends by identifying folks who may be due to be exited from your program, folks who in HMIS appear to not have had any activity, any services in 90 days, and then it's showing you maybe these are folks who you might be exiting if you're not actually serving them. This report, when you run it as the web version in HMIS, of course, as always, you can click on any of these numbers and bring up the list of clients who make up that particular category, so you can quickly go through and correct their data.
I will chime in and say, because I've had the question, it's the HUD specs that determine the fact that some of the error count categories combine don't know, refused, missing, all together as an error. For HUD's definition, that is all data that has a problem, so it's an error count for them. And so we had to, of course, program the report the exact way that we were told to. And also that missing, data not collected is considered missing. So even if it says in the field, data not collected, and a staff person clicked that and saved the record, that is still data not collected, it's missing. So it is in the missing count. We've had that question come up because we sent this report out in the early part of getting ready for system performance measures. And so some of our larger agencies with the housing programs and shelter programs received it. And so I've already started looking at it. And so those questions have come up, like don't know and refused sometimes shouldn't be viewed as error, but it is an error for the purposes of the data quality perspective.
And then I just wanted to quickly show you where you can find this guide. So I'm on our King County HMIS website, kingcounty.hmis.cc, and I'm under the Forms and Guides tab. We're actually going to be redoing our website fairly soon, so hopefully this stuff will all be much more accessible and easy to find. But for now, this is how you find it. And it's down here under General Training Manual and Guides, and I'll open it up because it's so beautiful. And it's so worth looking at.
Only compared to the HUD specs, right?
Oh, I think it's beautiful in its own right. So you can see it's 14 pages, or I think it's actually 15 pages, but well, maybe not, I guess not. There's each of the report sections here, so you can quickly get to the report section that you have a question about, or you can just go through and each section of the report sort of identifies what is being talked about in this section, and then breaks each field down and with an exact definition of who's being counted in that field, and if applicable, specifically which fields in 30 Human Services we're looking at, and what answers we're looking at in order to get somebody counted into this field. So
It's beautiful.
that's all I needed, Kate. Thank you. All right. And again, so this is one that can help you. Let me go back to present. This is one that can help you identify whether your programs are meeting HUD's data completeness thresholds, whether there is data that doesn't make sense, and that's going to be that issues column for the different measures. And then do we have clients who need to be exited in that inactive section, as well as other information. But those are just a few of the unique pieces that can be identified in this report. So those are the 4 reports that I wanted to talk about. Does anyone have any questions about those?
Any questions in general?
Yeah, this is a question time.
We sort of want to speed through stuff. I know that, okay, go ahead.
Actually, I did have a question about the project participation, kind of sort of like a follow-up to the question I had earlier. What about issues of consent for people who are in projects that are not required to have HMIS, but we would like to still collect HMIS information from them? Is there any issues that we have to deal with consent, because we don't have to collect data from them, so they can just say no?
Well, I mean, so that's one thing to consider when having non-participating projects, or having projects in HMIS that aren't technically required to be participating in HMIS. I mean, clients do still need to consent to have their information in HMIS, since it will be accessible in HMIS as it would be for anyone else. The same data quality expectations still apply. Yeah, it's kind of the same. I mean, there's no real difference between a program that is not required to participate but is participating and a program that is required to participate. In order to have high data quality, we have to hold everybody to the same standard.
I know there's been a couple questions online about data quality as it relates to destination and night-by-night shelters and day centers. Because of the nature of the service and the population, the fact that it is still a required data element, so those error rates tend to be higher. So there's been there was a few people asking for best practices, and so that's something that I know we have a very targeted night-by-night shelter training next month. That probably will come up during that conversation. We're continuing to try to develop best practices and gather best practices from you all. If you have sort of good success in the processes you have in place in terms of your service workflow to gather destination from folks who you're exiting from night-by-night shelters and day centers. So that, and everybody's aware of what the challenges are in that situation. For sure. So that tends to be where we see the highest error rates in terms of destination, would be among those types of programs that are in HMIS. Are there other,
Question. Back to the cleanup of the community queue, is it possible that developers could make a link from that house date that just goes over and like auto pulls it out once that house date is entered?
So the question is whether, with regard to cleaning up the community queue, whether there could be kind of an automated process that happens to clean up folks who are who've been housed. We're having a lot of conversations about that, about what's going to make the most sense. And actually, I think that we are putting in place something. It's coming in an upcoming round of development for the software that will, when somebody enters, actually when somebody enrolls a client in a housing program and they're on the community queue, they'll get a pop-up that says, just so you know, this person is on the community queue and is now going to be removed as a result of your enrollment. So there you go. And the same with exits. If you exit somebody to a housed destination, another pop-up that warns you and then does indeed remove that person from the queue. So that is upcoming. Yeah.
How is that going to apply then to the VASH programs that don't actually require, or that they're technically housed, but they're temporary, so they're in transitional housing as a veteran, which technically still makes them eligible to be involved in the queue because they're not permanently housed.
So the question was, how does this apply to VASH? That's a good question. I am not sure. Certainly all of our communities that use Clarity Human Services also have VASH. So I'm sure that they're working out the details of it, and I'm just not privy to it, but certainly that sort of thing will be taken into consideration.
Yeah.
It's also relating to our Santos place because it's a similar situation. So they're having issues with their participants disappearing from the community queue, but they need to stay on because they're just basically in transitional out there.
Sounds like this is a Volt Bash VA
Yeah.
conversation, so we just need to make sure we flag it.
Yeah,
Actually, I've had,
And that's why ours too.
sure.
With the VASH. So just for folks on the line who aren't hearing it, there's been a quick conversation around the particular needs of the VASH programs and as it relates to the community queue and the criteria used to remove clients off of the queue. I'm just characterizing so they are in the loop. Go ahead.
actually, I've had issues with more than just VASH, with other types of housing counseling programs for some of our clients in our encampments, homeless encampments, who are still being kicked off the queue because their involvement in a housing placement program, not housing, they are not housed, obviously not housed, they're in our encampments, and yet because of this involvement, that for some reason qualifies them to be kicked off the queue.
That doesn't sound, I mean, we did a push to clean folks off the queue that we automated, and what we did was we looked for folks who had exits to house destinations and did not have subsequent shelter enrollments and a handful of other types of enrollments. Unfortunately, we did not, encampments were not part of that list when we were trying to think of all the things to consider as subsequent returns to homelessness so as to not. So it may have been that some folks were unintentionally removed because of that. But most of the folks who were removed because they had exits to house destinations without subsequent enrollments that would indicate that they had returned to homelessness.
Permanent or transition, because I also had a whole slew of individuals that are being kicked off that are in some sort of transitional housing program.
So it did include, I believe it included transitional housing, but I think that it's only, you only get to stay on the queue if you're in transitional housing, if you're in band 3.
Okay.
I believe
Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah, I think that was the issue. Yeah. So, and we can always follow up. I know there's a question back here.
I was kind of interested in looking at the case management part of this data entry. If you have any best practices on that.
Around case management, the feature.
I'm also interested in.
We have a ton
Okay.
of best practices around that. I'm not sure we can squeeze them into 8 minutes, but we're actually, so next month we're doing, or not next month, the month after next, in July. We have an upcoming training, Leveraging HMIS for Program Management, that is going to talk about how to use the software sort of on the ground, like for managing programs, and it'll cover both some essentially what folks who manage programs might like to know about the system, because there's often a focus around HMIS in terms of compliance and reporting and sort of what your funders are requiring of you. And this is going to get more into, okay, well, if you're using the system every day, what else can you get out of it? What other benefits can it offer you? And how can you use it for your program beyond just data quality and reporting.
And we are trying to also include some more, highlight some of the features, more features in the newsletter articles as well. I mean, sort of, you could go to the website and try to learn everything about every part of it. So we're trying to pick out those things that we're hearing about that people might be most interested in. So we'll make sure to add that to the list as well.
Yeah.
Is there any way to have the email sent to more than just the program lead? How do I do that?
So the question was whether there are ways to have the emails, the system notifications. Is that what you're talking about? Or
Yeah, because we have somebody who is our program lead, but isn't the best person with emails. So I really didn't know about half of the emails that are going out,
Sure.
which
Yeah.
I probably need to know about.
You're definitely the only agency with that problem.
So I was wondering if we could just add another email.
So you're talking about the newsletter emails or the system notification? Okay.
Yeah.
So so adding additional users, so anyone can sign up for the newsletter. That is, and we try to send the newsletter goes out broadly. In general, when we communicate, we try to communicate with everybody unless there's a reason to only communicate with agency leads. Like our upcoming shelter training, our night-by-night shelter training, we only communicated to agency leads because we wanted them to, to identify who best would be the appropriate folks to attend this training. But in general, we send things out pretty broadly. If you need either an additional person to receive the communications that we send to agency leads, or if you need an additional program-specific contact, in both of those cases, your agency lead would need to let us know that, and then we can just add whoever they specify.
Okay, because the one I'm really referring to is I never even knew about this monthly staff report that came out the 15th of every month. I had no idea.
And I think, and that does go to
The lead.
Yeah, so just if you have your agency lead contact the help desk, and we can add anyone else who needs to be added to receive those communications.
That report can also be run out there.
Right, that's true.
Yeah.
That's a good point.
Run that report yourself.
Yeah, so that's also a point. The monthly staff report can be run
I
on
don't know
your
if she's catching that. Yeah. Did you catch that? That report can also, you can run it directly.
Oh.
Yeah, it's in the
I have no problem with that.
It's in the report library.
Okay, great.
under email reports.
Okay. Perfect.
Isn't there also a scheduled run on the reports?
So there's a question about whether there's an option to schedule reports. There is indeed an option to schedule a report. It's only one date though, so you can't like schedule a recurring report, which would be very nice if you could. But you could schedule it to run in a month, and then when you get it in a month, add another schedule for the next month, and so on. So yes, you can schedule reports to run in the future. Generally, we recommend it if you're running like a really big report and you know you're going to want it first thing in the morning, to have it run at night so that when you get in, it's ready for you and you don't have to wait for it to run.
Yeah. With the training, I know we're at about the end of our time. We wanted to point out so that the night-by-night online training that, like Sarah said, was particular to the agencies that have night-by-night shelters set up in the system. The other two, the June 21st and June 29th, we're sending out registration probably at the end of today for some sort of office hours. So instead of doing a general user group in June, we're going to be doing these 2 online sessions for any users who want to send us any questions ahead of time, who I just want to log on and listen in, ask questions. It'll be only online, so we won't be managing the 2 audiences, and it'll definitely be hands-on, whatever question we can, I mean,
Yeah.
the how-to type of questions that people might not be able to ask here and see a demo, we could quickly be online doing a demo of like, oh, this is how you do that. This is the screen you would go to. This is the report. So we're offering 2 sessions of those in June for some additional support.
And we're giving that a try to see if this is maybe a better format for folks to get, because oftentimes folks have very specific questions that seem involved and it would be helpful to have a demo. So we're going to see if this is helpful to have folks have a place that you can just, call in with whatever questions or log in so that you can see the screen as well. And then we can just walk through everybody through it.
And then the July training, we're not sure the location or date yet, but it'll probably be one of the last 2 weeks, either the 3rd or 4th week in July. The 4th, yeah. We typically go for the 4th week, but.
Yeah.
Are there any other final questions? I don't think we have any more here online. Thank you everybody online for bearing with the Q&A stuff that happens. We'll follow up with anybody, or please feel free to follow up with us if we didn't get to your question. There were some comments that didn't get shared. And thank you to everybody who came to Renton on a sunny Friday before a holiday weekend.
Have a good weekend, everybody.
And we're hanging out if there's any specific questions.
Yeah.
I'm going to end our meeting online.
Sure.